Burned everything you see in this picture, everything except for the Woodward house. 2 fires, the last one 1892, I believe, consumed the whole town. It was rebuilt again. That's why you see dates in town like 1908. Iron Door, I think, is something similar after the turn of the century. But that's Johnsville. Okay, so that's the old scene. The new scene, 1908, when my family, the descendants of these guys, the MacGregor's daughter Maggie, you saw in the picture, married one of the miners who worked there, named Richard White. One of the Whites, Jim White, is here today. We have, again, just 2 degrees of separation. Everybody kind of is close to everybody else. Richard White was actually a photographer, in addition to being a blacksmith, and he took this in 1902. The mill by that time was tributed out. Just a few miners working. The gold production had dropped dramatically. Okay, Darcy. By 1958, time of the park, the Mohawk looked like this. No surprise. This was how I saw it when I was a kid, clearly beginning to decay rapidly. And by 2003, okay, it looked like this. Inside the mill, you're now seeing the original beams, and these are on the Woodward drawings. You can see they're old, they're dark, they're almost black from soot and age. But there's so many new pieces that have been added just to keep the mill up. Linchpin Engineering, one of the firms participating now in stabilizing the mill, did some of this early work. They added every winter, every 4 years, every whatever, another piece of the original mill would go. They would add timber to reinforce it. And it began to look more complicated. Okay. The Woodward drawings, another way to tell this story, and I've been happy and thrilled that we've been able to include them, because even if the worst case happened, even if the mill did collapse, you could argue that there is a story preserved about the building in the Woodward drawings. Ideally, those drawings might inform a complete restoration of the mill, but they exist, and so does the mill. The two may talk to each other as time goes forward and produce something, a restoration that we would be truly amazed and lucky to have. But that's the condition of the drawings now, and just like the mill, the drawings themselves are going to need restoration. We've restored 2 of them, the first 2 that I saw about 10 years ago. The remainder, the ones that I saw this week, well, you're looking at them, and they need help. Okay. Second drawing. This was one of the 2 drawings that was preserved we knew about 10 years ago that kind of started the interest in the Woodward drawings. Okay. And roll the credits. So, appreciate. This is, let's see, two people to give credit to. The drawings are now the property of Johnsville Historical Society. I'm on their board. There are copies of a newsletter on the table when you leave. If you'd like to grab one and learn a little more about them, love to have you, love to have the interest. The book, I'm indebted to PESPA for having published this somewhat larger version of the history of the mine and the town. Thank you, PESPA, for doing this. It was a large project. It was kind of an expensive book to publish. I appreciate their patience, faith, and support. The book was out in 2016. They've just reprinted it. There are copies upstairs, and I probably signed maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them, if you'd like to get one of the signed copies. So, thank you very much for listening. The other part of this talk is an update from Alex Nee, but I'd like to welcome Alex. Hand her the laser pointer. Awesome. Thank you guys. You've been a great audience.
What question?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
You had a picture of the family, the miners, all told, and there was kids in front.
Yeah.
Did they, most of them was Johnsville, were the families, or was it a supply area for the miners?
Families.
Or both?
It was families. In fact, both towns, Eureka Mills and Johnsville, both were family towns. Johnsville did allow a little more liquor. There were bars. Eureka Mills was a little drier, but they both had concentrations of Cornish families and a lot of other minority groups that we haven't talked about. The gold that was left in the pulp came down into Johnsville and was ground up by largely Italian workers, for example, all who lived in Johnsville.
Okay, did the miners, you say they were Cornish?
Many.
Did most of them bring their families with them?
Yes.
From Europe?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the families were living here, which is one of the reasons why the mine was so successful. Good.
Hey, Bruce?
Jim.
I've got to head upstairs.
Okay. Jim, good to see you. Yeah. See you soon.
Yeah, we're going to go down to church.
Okay. See you then. All right.
I have a quick question.
Jerry.
So, it's kind of a theoretical question. So theoretically, permissions were given to do some kind of similar gold extraction methods in here. Do you think it would be financially viable for a business to extract gold from this hill?
Today?
In modern times, would it be financially viable for business?
It's a great question, Jerry. All the ore at $6 a ton or less is still in the mountain.
Yeah.
They vacated. The extraction methods today are dramatically more efficient and dramatically less expensive. So the answer to your question is yes, there's a lot of ore that could be considered worth mining.
I was thinking about that. Tons of gold still in our hills.
Yeah, exactly. It's called Gold Mountain for a reason.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Mead. I am the Sierra District Chief of Cultural Resources for State Parks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about...
Can I mic you?
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Okay.
Real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Great, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the contemporary history of the mill, what's been happening in the past few decades, and where Parks is going with the stabilization effort. This is a picture of the mill this winter. So this is what the primary issue that we're going to talk about today. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to use the term stabilization, and Bruce mentioned a little bit, oh, maybe we could do a restoration, or maybe so I want to talk a little bit about what those different terms mean, because they're very different in terms of what our approach is going to be for how we handle the structure. So stabilization is essentially freezing the building exactly as it is right now, keeping it in the exact condition it is and not letting it deteriorate anymore. We're going to do whatever we can to kind of protect its existing form. That's stabilization. Restoration, like Bruce was mentioning, would be if we were going to bring the building back to a very specific point in time. So let's say we wanted to bring it back to its 1880 condition. That would be a restoration. Or its 1953 condition when the park inherited it. That would be a restoration, and we would use historic documentation, such as Woodward drawings, to inform those decisions, and we would base it off of historic research. A rehabilitation, you probably hear that word too, is when we are making interventions to the building so that we could potentially change its use, or maybe we have be a museum, something like that. So that would be a change to the building, and we would use modern techniques to intervene with the structure. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to... No, you're fine. There you go. So we're going to do, Parks' approach is as a stabilization. We're not going to zhuzh it up. We're not going to make it fancy. We're not going to make it clean and pristine. We're going to keep it exactly as it is and try to protect it from deteriorating any further. This drawing that's on here is from some of the Department of General Services, the State Architect's Office, from the 1970s, which is when the real first kind of Parks assessment of the structure and what we can do to it, it comes from. Okay, next one. So I'm going to focus kind of on the past 25 years specifically. In 2004, there was an assessment done and identified all of the issues, essentially. So there was a significant amount of sway, wood deterioration, and the siding had deteriorated so severely there was basically no building envelope left. At this point in time, Parks installed those kind of steel cross bracings that you can see at the back wall to kind of help support the structure, and that's about it. 2016, the building had continued to deteriorate. 2016, Linchpin Engineering that Bruce mentioned was brought in for an engineering assessment for what it would take for a whole building restoration. So that's what I was talking about before, of really bringing it back to what it would have looked like either at the turn of the century or a very specific point in time. They applied a cost point to that in 2016, and that was about $5 million. And that's in 2016. So Parks does not have that kind of capital at this point. So what they also included were some recommendations for immediate shoring, that kind of immediate stabilization to prevent it from falling down any further. So in 2016, these interim stabilization project is what you can see now. If you kind of look through the front, it's the newer timber that you see, some posts, and also shoring up the trusses that had failed. The whole structure restoration is postponed because it takes a long time to raise $5 million. So that's been postponed while the immediate temporary shoring was put in place. Come to this past winter. The heaviest winter that the area has seen in decades. Substantial snow load to the roof of the structure, weakening the roof depression that's already there, and snapping some of the interior support structures. In March of this past winter, the entire front shed portion collapses. Next picture, please. This is, that's just our timeline. So now I'm gonna go back to 2016. This is what Linchpin Engineering recommended for our temporary shoring. So this is just an isometric of what they prepared, and this is what was the purple, and the blue in the front is what was installed into the structure. Next slide. I'm sorry these photos are so grainy. They're from a text message from our maintenance chief. This is the building we're in right now. This is March of this year. This is the entrance portico where you all came in. This right here, our maintenance staff, Bruce and Chris, they're outside. They had to shovel out. They had to actually take a backhoe to get snow off the building, shovel it out. If you see them outside, please say thank you. Think of a round of applause for our maintenance staff. This was, honestly, this was insane. No one had ever experienced anything like this on this structure. At a certain point, the portico there, it started to sink because of the snow load, so they had to get up there, shovel it all off. They used a backhoe to even get access to the building. This is 20 feet of snow, 20 feet. So that was what we were dealing with, one of the heaviest snow loads on record. The story, I don't remember if it was Bruce or who it was, but someone was out here when the guy from the weather service came out to check the weather station that's over by the Moriarty house. And he said that this past winter, that weather station registered the most snow of any that were in his region. So that's just to tell you that this specific spot here up on the mountain had the most snow in probably a 100-mile radius that he had been checking. Next slide, please. So that's a lot of snow. That's a lot of weight on a building that was already susceptible to damage. So this is what ended up happening. I'm sorry, these are kind of dark photos, but this was the immediate text photos from the maintenance staff of this just happened. This is the front shed addition that's on the south elevation of the structure. You can see here, it's basically just completely detached, came off. Just to give you a sense of the snow, this is the top of that shed addition right here. And I'll show a picture of it now in the spring, and if you go up to see it, you'll see what I'm talking about. So this is the entire shed structure. Probably the only reason these walls are still standing is because they were encased in snow. There was so much snow that it was holding that part up, which is a good thing because it's causing a point of shear issue where this entire front structure is pulling the exterior wall here and pulling it outward. So a bunch of these posts have snapped, a bunch of the cross bracing that was put in 2016 has snapped, this roof depression has worsened, so these trusses are now compromised, and all of this came down in March, so about 3 months ago. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here's what it was before. This is 2017. So this is to give you an example of how high that snow was. that snow is up to here. Okay, next. This is my flashy transition. And now this is what it turned into. So that snow load caused this entire south elevation to collapse and deteriorate. Can you go back and just kind of toggle between them just to show that's what it was? That's what came down. Strictly because of snow load. Okay? So we are partnering with many groups. So Parks is obviously the property owner. We are in charge of all the projects. Lynchpin Engineer is our on-call structural engineer, which thankfully they've been involved since the early 2000s. So they're well versed in this structure and what's been going on and what previous interventions have been. PESPA is also actively involved in future fundraising. And then Bruce and the Johnsville Historical Society have been helping out with sharing their drawings and just participating in kind of the history of the building and what's been going on. Okay, next one. So our next steps, this is right now. This is what's happened. This is what it looks like. I think this was June, still snow on the ground. Everyone who lives around here understands that. So this wall here, the west side of this southern elevation, completely gone. The roof, completely gone. This whole elevation detached from the building. These are the cross posts down up 2 floors lower that are now missing or compromised. So first things first, our Lynchpin prepared recommendations. First step was fencing the area off and closing it off to the public. Folks really like to go explore in there, and it's incredibly dangerous right now. So I would just caution visitors and anyone you talk to about it, don't go nearby. The fence is up for a reason. This area over here, it's not really in the picture, but over the night wheel has also collapsed. That was a couple years ago due to snow. So there's just a lot of debris and a lot of compromised structures over here. So first things first was put up a fence. Keep people from getting too curious and getting inside the building. It's been closed off to the public for many years, but people always seem to find a way in. Next steps will be removing this south appendage because it's causing such stress on that elevation in those posts. Then we have to decide whether we reconstruct it or we just remove it and take it back to a previous period where that appendage was not part of it. Install new shoring on the interior, so more cross bracing and more posts. Replacing the missing truss that were compromised by the roof depression. And enclosing the walls, either this wall on the east side of the structure where people and critters are getting in, and then also reattaching and reconstructing the south wall. That's going to be huge. Adding the siding back on this south wall will create so much shear strength for the building that it will really help it for any future big winter loads. And then also, for lack of a better term, I'm not a structural engineer, I'm a building conservator, so I reflect on Doug's recommendations, but pop that out, just kind of pop that roof, on a car, just get the dent out, pop that roof back up and install new trusses up at the top to kind of support that roof. Okay, next slide, please. So, it's going to take a lot. Our next steps, we're waiting for Lynchpin Construction to prepare some drawings for us. Hopefully by the end of this summer, we'll have those. Unfortunately, we will likely have to face one more winter before we can have any really thorough interventions happening. But we're going to fundraise and go for grants, go for some of our park allocation money, and hopefully using our partner foundations, PESPA and Johnsville Historical Society, do some fundraising efforts with the public. We're looking, but we haven't gotten our cost estimate, but we're looking ballpark $200,000 to shore this up again and get it standing. Again, to a state of stabilization. Its current existing state, just make sure it doesn't get any worse than it already did. So once those drawings are prepared, we can hopefully get some construction contracts going next spring after the next winter, and we can get it stabilized again. And I think that's the end. So maybe one more. That's the end. Any questions about that effort? It's a lot. We got our work cut out for us, that's for sure. Yes, Bruce?
If they were thinking in terms of funding, just a kind of a real general question, Is it possible that a large donor with private money could help?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that?
Yeah, if there are donors interested in helping donations to PESPA, PESPA is our formal cooperating agency or cooperating association with the park, and so they can fund projects directly. So if donors give money to PESPA, then PESPA can fund projects directly to the park. They can't donate to the park. We can't accept donations, financial donations like that, because we are a state agency, but they can donate to our partner association. Yeah, that's one of their most fundamental, critical roles, is helping us fund things.
Over the years, seeing what each year that thing deteriorating a little more, I was totally amazed the winter we had this year that it is even still standing.
Agreed. So, and I will say that 2016 stabilization effort, when linchpin came back out again, you could tell they were like, it worked. And that's really what he said, is that the posts that were holding up those trusses were in great shape. So if those posts had not, that stabilization hadn't been done in 2016, I think it would be a completely different story. It did its job. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. So now we just need to kind of button it up to protect what's been done and keep it watertight. Watertight. Keep it a little bit more contained. We'll try that. Yeah. Yes.
So I have a question about funding cycles. You said the plans won't be ready in time to start and the contracting won't be ready to start this year.
Yeah.
How does the funding cycle work with the state parks money, and how much money do you think is possible to get from the state?
How much time do you have? No, just kidding. I could go. This could take a while. No, I'll keep it very simple. So the state is on a fiscal year of July 1st to June 30th. So we had money from the disaster FEMA fund for the winter storms to do this initial assessment. So that was all taken care of, no problem. It's also going to pay for the construction drawings and the next step. So that stuff is paid for through FEMA, thank goodness. This Plumas County was declared a disaster area, so we were able to tap into that. Then for the next phase, the state gets a general kind of allocation for stuff, and then that's about $2 million, and that's for the whole district, for everything, maintenance, roads, salaries, everything. Then we have specific pots that go to very specific projects. So as the cultural manager, I get a little teeny tiny pot, and then the interpreters get a little pot, and maintenance gets a big pot, and the rangers get a big pot. You can't tell that I'm a little bitter about how much my pot. So we can have a little bit. We'll patchwork quilt some funding from all these different sources that we have, and then, but it won't be $200,000. So we're going to apply for some grants. We can do some cultural grants to fund it. We can apply for some emergency money again if FEMA agrees, and then we'll have to do fundraising. And then if there's enough we can set aside now in the beginning of this fiscal year, it's July, so we're just starting, maybe we can set aside a chunk of our general allocation towards it. Those are the high-level conversations that our superintendent kind of has to weigh. What are the other needs? What are the other priorities? Obviously, this is a huge public safety issue, aside from just a threat to a cultural resource. It's also really, in my opinion, the real backbone of this park is this mill. So we want to really put as much attention and effort towards this as possible, but there's a lot of competing needs, obviously, throughout the district. And we are going to have to turn and rely heavily on fundraising to make this happen. So our nonprofit partners will be instrumental in this. Yeah.
If construction starts in the spring, what do you foresee realistically? How far along can you be by the end of next season?
I think the shoring could certainly be installed. Yeah. So what I'm hopeful is that we have to go through our process of approvals internally and discussions of removing this addition so that it at least removes some of the stress. Potentially, if our internal staff could do it, we could potentially do that this fall. If our maintenance staff feels okay. If we need to hire an outside demolition contractor to come in, probably that waits till spring. But that could be done first thing. Then it's about putting in the shoring and then recladding the exterior. So I think for sure we could get the shoring in by next 2 winters now, winter of 2014. Whether we can get it completely recited, it'll all depend on contracts and contractors.
You get stabilized.
I'm sure you all know it's really tough to get contractors. It's even tougher for the state to get contractors. So it'll all depend on if we can get those things lined up. But that's why we want to get all of our ducks in a row with planning this summer and this fall, so that hopefully by next spring we can just hit the ground running. Yeah, good questions. Yes?
I have a couple of historical questions, maybe